They thought they could silence him. They thought they could scatter a ministry that had stood for years like a fortress. But in the end, they became the ones begging for a way out. Before we go on, please remember to like this video and subscribe for more real-time gist like this. It all started quietly. Whispers in the corridors of influence. Names that never made the news. Faces that avoided the camera. These were not ordinary critics. They were powerful. So powerful that even politicians greeted them with respect and fear. And now their focus had turned to one man, Pastor Paul Enenche, and the ministry God had placed in his hands, Dunamis International Gospel Center. At first, it looked like just another round of criticism. After all, big pastors in Nigeria face public attacks all the time, but this was different. These people were not content with just bad-mouthing him online or questioning his teachings. They wanted the entire foundation of the church to collapse. They wanted the fire of Dunamis to be snuffed out completely, and they had a plan. They began with infiltration. Unknown to many, the cartels planted individuals in the church workforce. People who smiled during services, sang in the choir, and even volunteered in special events. But behind closed doors, their mission was simple. Find something, anything, that could be twisted into a scandal. Weeks passed. They dug into finances, they monitored meetings, they tried to catch staff in compromising conversations. Yet everything came back clean. No stolen funds, no hidden agendas. The frustration grew, but they didn't stop. Please remember to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next will shock you. When internal sabotage failed, they moved to the media. They paid certain bloggers to release stories that looked convincing but were full of lies. Fake documents appeared online, edited photos made their rounds, and anonymous insiders claimed that the church was involved in shady deals. At first, some people believed it, but anyone who had ever stepped foot into Dunamis knew something wasn't adding up. The cartels underestimated one thing: loyalty. Dunamis members were not casual attendees. They were deeply connected to the vision. Instead of scattering, they rallied around their pastor. Prayer meetings doubled. Fasting multiplied. And while the attacks intensified, something strange began to happen. Attendance in the church actually grew. By now, the cartels were restless. Their financial backers were demanding results. Millions had been spent to bring the church down, but the opposite was happening. They decided to escalate to something dangerous. One evening, after a powerful Sunday service, strange vehicles were spotted trailing Pastor Enenche's convoy. Security noticed them, but they disappeared into the night. 2 days later, there was an attempt to frame a senior church official for illegal money laundering. The plan was to drag Dunamis into a prolonged court battle that would drain resources and tarnish its name. But they made a fatal mistake. The very evidence they tried to plant was intercepted before it could be used. Through an unexpected chain of events, it landed in the hands of people who had no loyalty to the cartels and decided to expose the setup. Within hours, the plan was in ruins. The exposure caused a chain reaction. Political allies began to distance themselves from the cartel leaders. Business partners pulled out. And as pressure mounted, they realized that they had stirred something far bigger than they anticipated. Members of Dunamis began sharing testimonies publicly, flooding social media with positive stories about the church. Instead of shame, the ministry was now in the spotlight for all the right reasons. In desperation, the cartels tried to negotiate quietly. They sent messages through mutual contacts trying to clear the air, but it was too late. The story had already shifted. The hunters had become the hunted. And here's the part they never saw coming. Some of the insiders they planted ended up giving their lives to Christ during the very services they were sent to disrupt. They confessed everything, naming names, providing proof, and revealing details of meetings where the attacks were planned. By the time it was over, the cartels were finished. Their influence had crumbled, their reputation destroyed. And Dunamis? It stood stronger than ever. New branches opened, crusades drew unprecedented crowds, and Pastor Paul's voice reached even more nations. If there's one thing this whole saga proved, is that you cannot fight what God has established and expect to win. You may gather wealth, power, and connections, but when the truth stands, lies will always collapse under their own weight. So next time you see a storm rising against someone who is walking in the divine assignment, remember, storms don't last forever. But those anchored in the right foundation will still be standing when the clouds clear. By the time the cartel's plans began to crumble, some of their own members had started disappearing from public view. Not because they were in hiding, but because the shame was too heavy to carry. These were men and women used to controlling narratives, deciding who rises and who falls in the public eye. Yet here they were, watching as their every move seemed to backfire. Behind the scenes, a few of them held secret meetings to decide whether to retreat completely or to try one last desperate move. The problem was they underestimated how much spiritual momentum had already been built by the Dunamis congregation. Every failed attempt against the church only fueled more prayer, and anyone who has lived long in Nigeria knows when a group of committed believers start praying day and night, strange things start happening. And strange things did happen. First, a mysterious leak exposed one of the cartel's main financiers in a completely unrelated scandal. The news trended for days, overshadowing the entire agenda against Pastor Enenche. Then, another key player suffered a business collapse after a foreign partner suddenly pulled funding. It was almost as if everything they touched began to fail. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next shocked even the most loyal members of Dunamis. One of the church insiders, a man who had been quietly feeding information to the cartel, walked into Pastor Enenche's office one morning and asked for a private conversation. Eyewitnesses say his hands were trembling. He confessed that for months he had been under pressure to deliver damaging information, but he could no longer carry the weight of guilt. What shocked everyone was what he brought with him: audio recordings, meeting transcripts, and signed agreements between cartel leaders and media operators detailing how the attacks would be carried out. The evidence was overwhelming. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. Pastor Enenche didn't rush to the police or hold a press conference. Instead, he called for a closed-door prayer session with senior leaders. Witnesses later described that meeting as one of the most intense they had ever attended. No shouting at enemies, no public drama, just hours of focused prayer and declarations. Meanwhile, outside those walls, word began to spread. Rumors traveled faster than truth, but this time the rumors favored the church. People began whispering about how the plots had failed, how the attackers were losing everything they had built. And slowly, the very networks that once supported the cartels began to turn their backs on them. The cartels, cornered and desperate, tried to play the victim card. They began releasing statements claiming they were misunderstood, that they never intended harm. But Nigerians know when someone is only sorry because they got caught. Public sympathy was nowhere to be found. Weeks later, something happened that completely sealed their fate. At a major Dunamis service, an unexpected guest came forward during testimony time. To the shock of thousands in attendance, it was a former cartel member, one of the most vocal critics online. With tears in his eyes, he admitted that he had been part of the mission to destroy the church. He said he had been paid heavily to spread lies, but every attempt to harm the ministry only brought him personal loss, failed contracts, sudden illnesses in his family, even car accidents. He said he couldn't explain it, but he knew it was connected to the fight he had picked with the church. That testimony went viral. Clips spread across social media. Suddenly, the same people who had once questioned Dunamis were sharing words of encouragement. Attendance skyrocketed. And the cartels? They were done. No influence, no credibility, no way back into the corridors of power. In the months that followed, Dunamis launched new community outreach programs, building schools, supporting hospitals, feeding thousands. It was as if the attempted destruction had only poured fuel on the vision. Pastor Enenche's sermons began to carry a sharper edge filled with lessons about resilience, truth, and the danger of aligning with evil agendas. And somewhere, in quiet corners of Abuja and Lagos, the remnants of those cartels sat in silence, wondering how they had underestimated a man and a ministry so deeply rooted in purpose. Some would later admit privately that they wished they had never started. The regret was heavy because they hadn't just lost the battle, they had lost everything they stood on.